I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. She's international best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and trauma advocate, using storytelling to create safety, change, and healing. No other than Miss Amanda Quick.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for having me.
Yes, thank you, and welcome to Book 101 Review, Miss Amanda. And can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, well, you said it very well yourself. I'm a author, a speaker, and an advocate, as well as a coach who is mission to help other people also share their big stories with the world.
Definitely. And Miss Amanda Quick, thank you for sharing your talents to the world. I hope you will continue it and empower all people all over the world. What inspired you to become an author?
Well, I lived through a very big story that a lot of people don't make it out the other side. And the calling in me to share my story and write my book was really, really loud. And it felt like, it was just I had to. There wasn't really another explanation. And,
Yes.
so many people go through really, really challenging things and they sit in the shame and they hide it and they don't share what they walk through. But so many people need to know they're not alone in those experiences and that there is opportunity on the other side.
Definitely. So, how did you come up with the ideas of your book, The Sex Trafficker's Wife?
So this is my lived experience. This is my life from 2016 to 2020 that I lived through. So it was very much, reliving my own experience in detail to write my book.
Can you describe the typical writing of The Sex Trafficker's Wife?
So it's really walking through what I went through, what my thought processes were. It's a lot like me sitting down to tell you my story. It's very much, this is what happened and this is how I felt about it. And in the end, this is what I learned also.
Yes. So, did you outline your book before
I did
writing?
not.
Wow.
No, I did not. And I actually get this question quite a lot from people who also have stories and want to share and they don't know where to start and how do I do this? And the way that I actually did it is I sat down and I almost imagined that I was going to tell you what happened. And I started writing it like that. And the first draft was much shorter, but every time I reread it and edited it, I would get reminded of another component or another piece. And then I would go through my photos. And so it expanded and evolved, but it didn't start with an outline because it really started with, this is when the story began that I'm here to tell you.
Yes, it is. So, how do you stay motivated during the writing process?
So, writing a memoir like this is a very emotionally challenging thing to do because you're reliving your trauma in detail. And I chose to look at this as an opportunity to actually allow the healing to happen because I got to experience in a lot of ways what happened as I wrote it, but I was on the other end of it. I had gotten out of it. And so I could acknowledge the feelings that I didn't really feel safe to acknowledge before. And I could use that. And I, to be honest, had to set it down for months at a time to process, to breathe, to release. But the motivation and the knowing of what was on the other end of writing always kept me back going. And then really at the very end, the last probably 6 months, I had to very carefully carve out a specific time in my day and really focus on, pushing to the end because, how much is enough and how many times does it need editing and, all of those things. But in the end, I hired support to help me kind of complete that last piece. But it took me over 2 years to complete because of really just the amount of times I had to sit it down and process.
So, how did you create relatable and memorable memoir? of
Well,
yours?
I shared my story. I mean, this really uh, recognizing that so many people have gone through challenging relationships. So many people have experienced similar things. And so my goal was to approach this with as much radical honesty and accountability for myself, as well as empathizing with my past self, which is really an invitation for other people to see themselves in another lens and recognize that we all are doing the very best that we can where we are, and that once we know more, we have an opportunity to change and to stand up for ourselves and our children.
So this will be autobiography or a memoir.
Correct. Yes.
So which one? It's a
It's
memoir
a
or
memoir.
it's a
It's a
memoir?
memoir. Yes.
Okay. So how did you ensure that your characters or personalities and action remain consistent through your memoir?
Well, truthfully, they're just the people who exist, right? I didn't create these characters. These were real life myself, my children, my ex-husband, friends that I had. And so, there's not quite the same need to craft a character when that's the real life person. So I'm recalling real lived experiences.
Yes. Real people. So what's your favorite chapter of your memoir?
Oh, honestly, that is a hard question. It's either the first one or the last one, because the first one really captures you and you need to know more, but it is the beginning of the most challenging period in my life. But, the last one, it's really a lot of reflection on my part and a lot of understanding why things were the way they were and the opportunity in the trauma and the challenge. And, my goal wasn't just to share the story, but to really inspire hope in others for their stories.
What do you think makes your memoir compelling and engaging?
Well, it is a shocking event to anybody. Having the person that you thought you knew not come home because they've been arrested for attempted human trafficking is a pretty shocking event in my life. But then to write about it, and intentionally, I chose the name "The Sex Trafficker's Wife" to really share the amount of shock that I went through. And um, you know, as I was living through, it was always like here's another thing and another thing and another thing. It was worse than any TV drama. And so there's always more that continues to happen. And I really share that in the story.
Just like the movie Taken.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's awesome movie. And have you ever rewrite your memoir?
I haven't rewritten it, no, not since I published it. I do have plans for more books, which in the way that I tend to write, it's generally other lessons and lived experiences from my own learnings.
So how did you manage the pricing of your memoir?
Basically, just where the market is at. For a 200-page paperback, it's generally usually about the same price. I worked with a publishing company to help me do the cover and the final editing and some of the descriptions, and so they helped me set the initial pricing. But it's really just in line with what other books of that length and type are.
How do you handle writer's block when you're writing your memoir?
Well, writer's block to me is really an emotional process more than a mental one, and it's really understanding what emotion is challenging us at the moment that we're not wanting to look at, that's blocking us from continuing, and being gentle with ourselves and give grace, especially when you're reliving a very challenging time in your life, and finding support, whether that's therapy or coach or friends or whatever you need to do to really look at what emotion, shame, judgment, guilt is coming up for you that you're having a hard time writing.
Definitely. Totally agree with you, Miss Amanda. Before we go on, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season, with Chef Alessandro, one of specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. Please do tune in for our fifth season, people, fifth season, because our Food 101 will become more bigger, better, and bolder. So tune in, people, and please do listen. Food 101. So, Miss Amanda, what is the most challenging when you're writing your memoir?
The most challenging is truly understanding the power behind the very dark experiences you walked through and giving yourself grace as you go through that process.
Yes, grace, people, and I think forgive yourself, right?
Exactly.
Accept yourself. So, can you share a lesson you've learned
Oh
when you're
gosh.
writing memoir?
The one that's coming to mind to share right now is, so many mothers, especially, we put ourselves at the bottom of the pile. We everybody else comes first. We take care of our kids, we take care of our spouses, we take care of our friends, and we think that we're doing this that everybody else is okay, right? There's so many things to take
Yes,
care of, but I had to learn through my experiences and really reminded as I was writing that it's actually backwards. As moms, we actually have to put ourselves first because we cannot take care of others until we are okay. And the belief that we have to do these set of things so our kids are okay, stay in the relationship, etc., is backwards when we're not okay. And our kids actually connect to us and ground to us. And so the more grounded and stable we are, the better they are. It's flipped. And I really hope that other mothers hear me when I say you have to take care of yourself, you have to exercise, you have to take time to yourself, and you have to really check in when things are challenging. What do you need? And is this situation supporting you? And put down all of the beliefs about the kids just for a minute and really check in of what you're teaching and modeling for your children as you're doing that.
yes, indeed. So, how do you handle criticism and feedback from your readers?
You'd be surprised. When I first took my story to social media, I got a lot of hate. Uh, and honestly, if it hit me and if I felt, upset by it, then I took it as an opportunity that there was something that I was still judging myself for. And once I processed that, I had this realization that if I left the comments, other people would come to my defense. And that really makes the algorithms very happy. And so I allowed the criticism to help me reach more people.
To inspire them.
Yeah.
And Miss Amanda, can you read one of your favorite chapter of your book,
Uh, let's see. You want me to read the whole chapter?
please?
Okay. Let's see. I feel like I need to start at the beginning. Um, okay. Chapter 1. It was a Tuesday in late April of 2016. Ethan, my oldest son, was turning 6 in just a couple of days, and Axel had just turned 4. Milo, my baby, was only 14 months old and still nursing quite frequently. It seemed like most days he was literally attached to me 24/7. He was either directly on my breast or wrapped in a baby carrier on my back. My 3 boys were my whole world. My mom was on her way to visit us in Colorado from where she lived in Hawaii. She tried to visit at least annually and usually came during the 2 big boys' birthday week at the end of April. I was feeling the pressure to make sure I got everything ready in time. My relationship with my mom hadn't been so great, really, since I was a teenager, which is why I moved out at 17. She wanted to connect with me, but I wasn't super interested. She was passive aggressive, and I had always felt she had so many expectations of who I was supposed to turn out to be, and clearly I was not meeting them. Thankfully, I had scheduled a house cleaner to come and help me get ready. When I was pregnant with Milo, I finally hired someone to help out every couple of weeks. Charlie, my husband, had been getting upset that I didn't keep the house clean enough. He did eventually realize that he too was capable of cleaning, but instead of doing so, he suggested I hire someone. Keeping the house picture-perfect clean was near impossible with 3 kids under 5. But that was my job these days, the house and the kids. Before I had my kids, I had a career. I had worked in the information technology field since I was 17, and I was pretty darn good at it. Puzzles and technology just came easy to me. After I had Ethan, I quit my job to stay home full-time. The pull to take care of my babies was stronger than I ever could have imagined. Leaving them in the care of strangers never felt like a viable choice for me. I was grateful for the financial support from Charlie's job, which allowed me to stay home with the boys. Most days, I was happy with that choice. I felt guilty that I wasn't contributing money to our budget, as I'd always been ultra-independent. But I knew that babyhood was short, and things would shift and change over time. On that day in April, Charlie left for work around 7 a.m., which was his usual time. He generally didn't even wake us when he left. He worked long hours most days, out of the door by 7 a.m. and not home till 7 or 8 at night. I expected him home even later that evening, as his mom had asked for help getting some old bikes out of her garage. His dad had passed away the December before, and she had been working on cleaning out his old stuff. The day itself was normal. The big kids had kindergarten and preschool, and I ran my errands. Milo was still taking 2 naps a day, and I usually lay down with him for at least one of them. He had me up 2 or 3 times a night nursing, and so catching up on sleep was important on the days the boys had school. That evening, I put the kids down for bed at about 8 p.m. I went downstairs, watched some TV, and waited for Charlie to come home. He sent me a text around 9 p.m. asking if there were any leftovers for dinner. I responded yes. His mom's house was only about 15 minutes away, so I assumed that meant he was just on his way home. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. I called his cell phone. It rang once and went straight to voicemail. The next try went straight to voicemail. I tried a few more times, confused. I decided to call and check in with his mom before it got any later. Maybe he was still there. She was surprised to hear from me this late. He had left over an hour ago. Well, then where the hell did he go? Maybe he decided to pick up food after all? She thought maybe he decided to just go drop the bikes off on his way home. It was not an unusual occurrence for Charlie to turn off his phone or not respond. In fact, ever since I left my day job and became a full-time stay-at-home parent, he was so much less available to me. If I called at 5 p.m. asking when he would come home from work so we could have a family dinner together, I would get told soon, only for him to show up long after the kids were in bed. If I asked him to please come home sooner, I was told he was doing the best he could. I felt guilty enough that he was financially providing for us, and so I did not dare question the commitment he had. If I got angry or frustrated, I would be met with defensiveness. I tried every communication trick I could think of over the years. I eventually stopped calling entirely and stopped asking. It was easier not to get worked up, and I just figured he'd show up when he did. Nothing I did ever changed this pattern. So not being able to reach him that night was not unusual. I just assumed he'd gotten caught up in something and didn't want me to bother him. I turned off the TV and decided to go to bed. I fully expected him to stroll in any minute, but I was not wasting sleep over it. I woke up at 2 a.m. when Milo started fussing to nurse. I snuggled and nursed him back to sleep and tried to listen to see if Charlie was home. I assumed he had to be here by now, but something in me wasn't certain. Once Milo finished, I ninja rolled out of bed so I wouldn't disturb him and went to check downstairs. Charlie and I hadn't slept in the same bed since Ethan was a baby. He just seemed to prefer the couch and falling asleep to the TV over sharing a bed with me and the current nursling. I hated the TV noise and preferred silence or simple white noise. It worked for us. And with 3 kids, it clearly didn't prevent us from being intimate. I peeked downstairs. No Charlie. I checked outside. The van he had taken that morning to ferry the bikes, that wasn't home either. His phone still went straight to voicemail. What the fuck? Where was he? I went back to bed, not wanting Milo to wake and realize I was gone. If he woke and I wasn't there, he'd squeal so loud the other 2 would wake up. So I just laid there, trying to stay calm. My mind was racing. Where could he be? I mean, he was notoriously late, sure, but not this late. He'd never done this before. My mind immediately went to a worst-case scenario. Was he dead in a ditch somewhere? What if he was actually gone? I was going to be all alone with 3 kids. Oh my God, the boys. How was I going to support us? That man was their father and the love of my life. I shoved that thought out of my mind. That couldn't be it. But I had to figure out what was happening. I got up again and snuck into the kitchen so the boys wouldn't hear me. This time I called the hospital. Maybe they have him, and they just hadn't been able to call me. They answered and checked the admission records. No Charlie and no John Doe's either. Back to bed again I went. Where is he? I fell back asleep for a short while and woke up again to Milo rooting for the boob. I nursed him again, making sure he was all the way back asleep before sneaking out again. It was now 5 a.m. I paced around the house. I tried his cell again, straight to voicemail. Who else could I call at this hour? I couldn't exactly go looking for him. I had 3 kids asleep in the house. I then had the idea to try calling non-emergency dispatch. The TV makes it seem like a person has to be missing for 24 hours, but maybe there was something they could do now. I called. The lady who answered listened to me explain what had happened. My husband hadn't come home last night, and this was so unlike him. Could she help? She said she was going to transfer me to the jail to see if he was there. Oh, well, okay, I said. I thought that was very unlikely, but whatever. She said to call her back if he wasn't there and she could help. Okay, thank you. I will call you right back. Another lady answered at the jail. I told her I was looking for my husband and gave her his name. She replied, yeah, we have him. What? You have him? Charles Watts, really? On what charge? How much to bail him out? I was so confused. This made no sense. What she said next was perhaps the last thing I ever expected to hear come out of anyone's mouth. The charge was attempted human trafficking, and his bond was $250,000. If I had cash, I could bail him out any time. I nearly dropped the phone. What? Wait, what? I couldn't even think straight. I wanted to ask more questions, but I didn't even know where to start. I thanked her and hung up the phone. I was now wide awake. I started Googling like crazy. What does that charge even mean? Human trafficking was what, like stealing people and moving them across borders? Like in shipping containers? To sell them? It made exactly 0 sense to me. It could not be possible that Charlie was involved in something like this. He was a father, a husband. He had a good job. We were comfortable. Hell, I technically had access to enough cash to bail him out right now. I found numbers for a bail bondsman. I called, and to my surprise, they picked up the phone at 5:30 a.m. The man I spoke to was very helpful and explained how this process worked. For 10% down and a lien on a house, they could help bail him out today. But he also said there would be a bond hearing in a day or two, and most of the time, these types of charges were reduced down to $100,000. And so it was possibly worth waiting a few more hours. He offered to go check on Charlie for me at the jail once they opened, which I accepted. I was really grateful. I needed someone to get eyes on him. Perhaps part of me thought that maybe someone had his wallet somehow, and it wasn't actually going to be him. But if that wasn't him, then I still didn't know where he was. I hung up and started trying to call lawyers. I've certainly watched enough crime shows to know that I needed a lawyer ASAP. I left a bunch of messages for everyone I could find on Google. Durango, Colorado is a very small town, and so there were only 2 or 3 that looked promising for criminal cases. It was now closer to 7 a.m. The boys would be up soon. I really didn't want to wake them early. They'd be impossible to get back down at this point. I tried to stay quiet to not pace around too much. My phone rang, and it was one of the lawyer's office calling me back. Wow, he was up at work early. But hey, that was awesome. He listened to me and repeated much of what the bail bondsman said. Bond hearing tomorrow or the next day, and there was an almost guaranteed reduction in the amount. He also said he could see me today at 11 a.m. in his office. Perfect, I'll be there. I then called Charlie's mom, knowing she'd be up by now. I told her that he never did come home and I had found him in jail. I told her the charge and what I knew so far. She said she was coming right over. She also suggested that I try to get Axel in preschool today. It was normally just Ethan's day to attend kindergarten, but not having to worry about Axel today would be very helpful. She wanted to go straight to the jail and try to see him as soon as they opened. The boys started waking up. I made coffee for myself and breakfast for them. The school agreed Axel could come in today. I told them it was a family emergency, hoping that was enough to not have to answer any more questions. Good, okay, we had a sort of plan. Next steps, at least. Charlie's mom arrived and we packed up the boys to take them to school. We were going to drop them off and then head straight to the jail. I ran inside and checked them in. The car ride was tense. We were both so confused. She kept talking about the van he was driving. We had just bought it about 6 months ago. He even jokingly called it a rape van. It was an all-black Ford Econoline with tinted windows all around. We bought it so Charlie could fit all the bikes, kids, and dog inside, rather than adding bike racks with locks to my minivan. He wanted to take them on all various adventures and such. His mom kept feeling like there was something there. Maybe the guy we bought it from had a warrant out and it was flagged. I was pretty skeptical, but we'd already registered it, so hey, I would take any explanation at this point. We got to the jail and walked inside. I was carrying Milo on my hip in a ring sling. He was still too young for preschool, and he was also young enough that he thankfully wouldn't understand where we were or what was going on. We asked to see Charlie. The lady at the front told me that you can't just visit someone in jail. You had to have an appointment. And the soonest we would be able to do that was tomorrow. What? Seriously? Clearly, we did not know how any of this worked. I knew better than to argue with her, especially when I had a baby strapped to me. Fine. Nothing we could do. We walked out. That was a total bust. I called the number the lady gave me from my phone and scheduled to see him tomorrow morning. I gave her my name and birthday as well as Charlie's mom and Milo's info too. We hung up and started to head back to the car. My phone immediately rang. It was the jail. The lady I had just made the appointment with told me that due to the nature of the charges, Milo would not be able to come for a visit. What? Why not? I was confused again. Milo was his son. Why couldn't he come? She repeated that because of the charge, Charlie could not visit with any minor. Well, fuck. Okay then. I took his name off the list. Now I also needed a babysitter, which was not something I was super comfortable with. I was not even sure who I could call. I would figure that out later, I guessed. After I hung up with them, we ran into the bail bondsman. I don't even know how I knew it was him, but I did. He had just come out of the jail after checking on Charlie. I shoved my phone at him. My background was a photo of Charlie with all of the boys. Is this him? Is this who you saw? Part of me hoped it wasn't. Yes, he said. That's him. My heart sank again. Well, at least I knew he wasn't dead. How is he? I asked. He's okay. Shaken up, but okay. I was so grateful that someone was able to check on him, even if it wasn't me. I thanked him and told him that I would be in touch just as soon as we heard about what was going to happen at the bond hearing. I had already initiated a transfer of money, but I didn't want to close any doors just yet. We got back in the car and headed to my house. We had a couple of hours until we needed to be at the lawyer's office, and Milo needed his morning nap. We were both grateful that Charlie was alive, but still so confused as to what was actually going on. As I drove, I realized, shit, I have to call his office. He was MIA at work. I didn't want him to lose his job over this. While I know he'd not been happy there for a while, whatever was going on shouldn't be what decided how that ended. I also realized I didn't actually know who to call. I didn't even know what his title was anymore. When I had left my job, it had also cut me off from knowing anything about Charlie's position. He would say that things were hard, and he didn't want to mix up the good that was us and the family with how messy it was at work. He literally never spoke about his role or what was going on with the company. Since I used to work for the same company, I decided to call the contacts I did know. Someone there would know who to get the message to the right people. I tried a few people, some through Facebook, some through old stored numbers in my phone. I also called the main line and left a message. I hoped that at least someone would get it to whomever he reported to. I used the same story. It was a family emergency, and I didn't expect him to be in all week. But he'd be in touch as soon as he could. He'd been there 12 years and was well respected, so I knew that they would take that as sufficient information to explain his absence. I was so grateful, one less obstacle. We got back to my house and I put Milo down for a nap. I hadn't eaten anything yet, and I was running on pure adrenaline. I kept pacing around the house. I needed to do something, but I didn't know what that something was. Charlie's mom was trying to keep me calm. She kept offering new theories or possibilities that could explain what was happening. I mostly ignored her. Fuck, I had to call my mom. She was literally on her way to my house right then. There was no option to keep this from her. She was going to be here tomorrow. I called her and she picked up. She and my stepdad had flown from Hawaii, where they lived, and I grew up, to Phoenix, and they were driving the rest of the way to Colorado. I told her what happened, and I immediately followed up with saying I had to stick by him and figure out what was going on here. She said, of course, of course. But I didn't actually believe her. I could feel the judgment already. I sucked it up and eventually hung up. It was time to wake Milo and go visit the lawyer. The lawyer worked out of a small office along Main Avenue in downtown. All of the buildings were old and creaky. We figured out which one was his and waited in the lobby for him to be ready to see us. Eventually, we were called in and sat down to try and explain what we knew. Charlie's mom was offering her theories. We both kept repeating that none of this made any sense. This wasn't Charlie. The lawyer listened and said he could help. He would need a $20,000 retainer, and he could call Charlie on the non-recorded line at the jail and get some more information. Okay, cool, I agreed. I had the cash in the checking account and could write him a check right away. As I started to do that, my phone rang. I picked it up. I had to accept the charges for the call. It was Charlie. I accepted the charges and answered the phone. He sounded so scared. I very quickly told him that I knew where he was and what the charges were. He said this was the first time that they let him call me. He said he'd been trying to get them to let him call me all night. I didn't want him to say anything more, knowing they were recording his calls. I told him I was currently in a lawyer's office and we were about to pay him a retainer so he could talk to him confidentially. Charlie was not going to say anything else to me. I said, I love you and we will get through this. I hung up and finished writing the check. The lawyer asked us to step out of the room so he could make the call. Charlie was his client, not us. He was very clear about that when I gave them a retainer. We left the office and I let Milo down to toddle around the waiting room. I was quiet and nervous. What could possibly be the explanation here? I was starting to think that there was more going on than I knew, but all of this still made exactly zero sense. After 10 minutes, the lawyer called me back into his office. Just me this time, not his mom, to which she was pretty taken aback. I left Milo with her and went in. He had notes from his phone call with Charlie. He summarized them for me. There was an online ad that Charlie had responded to. He said he was trying to help them. He thought it wasn't real. Huh? I was still so confused. An ad for what? My mind was trying to process what he was telling me, and it wasn't working very well. The lawyer said the next steps were to get through the bond hearing. We needed to be prepared for Charlie not to be allowed to come home or to see the kids. He was going to try what he could to get us some type of communication allowed, but we should know that might not happen. Okay then. We left his office and headed back to my house. There was really nothing else to do. Charlie's mom was trying to get me to tell her what was said, and I was super close-lipped. She asked, "So it's real?" And I looked at her with pain in my eyes. She got it and dropped the questioning. After we drove back to my house, she headed home and I went to pick up the boys from school. That afternoon, my phone rang, and it was an unknown local number. The caller identified him as one of the detectives on the case. He wanted me to come in so they could talk to me in person. He said he knew I must have a lot of questions and he would like to help answer them. I saw right through this tactic and told him I was going to have to talk to an attorney before agreeing to meet him, and I would call him back later. I also wanted to know where our van was and when I could get it back. He said that we could get it back, that he would get back to me about the van because the authorities were still processing it. Who did this guy think he was, trying to get me to turn on my husband? I fed the boys dinner and tried to calm my mind. I was a total wreck, and I knew I had to try for the boys. That evening, I called my good friend Morgan. I knew that I needed someone to help me with Milo in the morning. She was the only one I could think of to leave him with, and he already knew. I told her what was going on, and to my surprise, I didn't feel judgment from her. She had always liked Charlie and reminded me that he was a good man. There had to be an explanation that made sense. She also agreed not to tell her husband what was happening just yet and came right over in the morning. Her husband, Greg, and I used to be very close, but over the years that changed and I became closer to Morgan as we were both stay-at-home mothers. I was terrified of anyone finding out what was going on and still hoped that it was something was going to just go away. The next morning, Charlie's mom came over and helped me to get the boys off to school. It was a normal school day for them. Morgan arrived to watch Milo, and Charlie's mom and I left to drop off the other two boys, just like yesterday, and headed back to the jail. This time we had an appointment. The lady told us we would be meeting with Charlie over video. Wait, what? We couldn't actually see him? No, that's apparently protocol. Well, that sucks. We only had 30 minutes. She led us to a room with about 20 old-school CRT monitors. The big ones that looked to be at least 20 years old. We connected and waited. Charlie came on the screen. He looked exhausted and was disheveled. He clearly had been crying and seemed so scared. I shared with him that the lawyer would meet him at the bond hearing. Everyone seemed to think his bond would get reduced, so we just needed to hang tight. If it didn't get reduced, I would still get him out, but I was hoping his bond would get reduced. He agreed with my logic and said he was doing okay. We knew that he couldn't ask any real questions about what was happening, but we wanted him to know that we were there for him. We ended the video connection after telling him that we would see him that afternoon in court. As we left the jail, my phone rang. It was a police officer informing me I could pick up my vehicle at the impound lot. I didn't want them to hold on to it any longer than necessary, so we headed right there. The impound lot was near the hospital in this small, gated building, mostly deserted, with no one even on duty. You had to have someone meet you there to let you in. The cop was pulling in just as we got there. He handed us the keys, and I signed out the vehicle. In the back, I got a look at the van. It had bright yellow evidence stickers over every door. Inside, they had left a paper roster on the passenger seat of all of the things that they confiscated as evidence. I was in the driver's seat, and Charlie's mom saw it first. She picked it up, and her face fell. "I'm so sorry," she said, as she handed it over. They had taken his work computer, iPad, and phone. They'd also taken condoms he had on him and a bunch of cash. It was more evidence that really didn't look good. We never even used condoms, and so I really did not like what any of this implied. I did not allow myself to slow down long enough to thoroughly question anything. I kept hold of the idea that there had to be reasonable explanation for everything. I drove the van to the grocery store parking lot and parked it as far away from the other cars as I could, with Charlie's mom behind me in my car. It was a very difficult vehicle to drive, and neither she or I thought we could actually get it backed into the driveway safely. At least this way it was out of police hands. My plan was to get help moving it, and my stepdad arrived that evening. We headed back to my house. I was a wreck, but doing my darndest to stay calm. Charlie's mom was trying to help. She kept talking to me, trying to reassure me I needed space. I hid in my room to nurse Milo and just pretended I was fine. Eventually, it was time to head to the courthouse. Charlie's sister decided she also wanted to show support at the courthouse. We figured it couldn't hurt to have us all there. His sister, myself, and his mom all walked into the courtroom and took our seats. After the judge was seated, they brought in the accused prisoners, dressed in orange with shackles on their hands and feet. In walked about 10 men. All of them looked disheveled and with their heads down. Charlie was among the group of them. I had never seen him looking anything like this. He looked as if he was trying very hard not to cry. His hair was all over the
Miss
place.
Amanda, can we
Yes,
just
go ahead.
stop over there? And thank you so much for sharing your memoir to the world. So my last question is, what advice would you give to aspiring authors working on their first book?
I would give them advice to keep going, to trust that if you feel called to write, that somebody needs your story, and to find support if you're struggling.
Yes, find support, people. So, Miss Amanda, Miss Amanda, can you please invite our listeners to support your memoir, The Sex Trafficker's Wife?
Absolutely. You can go to thesextraffickerswife.com and all the links are there.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Amanda quick, because if you support her, more books to come. So, Miss Amanda, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Moricon, people, see you soon.